Hello and welcome to She Rises. This is a calm, scripture-rooted podcast for Christian women who are learning to rebuild steady faith, steady homes and steady hearts in a noisy world. I'm Johanne, and if today you're tired of living from pressure, reaction, comparison and fear, and you want to learn instead to walk with God in truth, peace, wisdom and courage, then this is a great series to start with. It's called Vision and Courage, but I want to say straight away that this isn't a series about becoming louder or busier or more impressive or suddenly transforming into the kind of woman who wakes at 5 a.m, drinks something green, journals beautifully and reads 3 chapters of Leviticus. It's already folded all the washing before the rest of us have located the kettle. Do those women really exist? But this is a quieter series than that. It's about the kind of courage Christian women often need in real life. Courage when the next step feels unclear, or when obedience feels costly, or when comparison creeps in and unsettles us. It's about courage when we need to plan without panic, when life feels hidden and ordinary, and we begin to wonder whether our faithfulness still matters. Sometimes courage is simply found in a conversation we've delayed intentionally because we know it will require honesty. Sometimes it appears in the moment we choose not to react as we once would have done. Sometimes it looks like beginning again with our children after a difficult morning, or setting a boundary without over-explaining it, or saying yes to God before we feel completely ready. And that's where we're going to begin today. This episode is about how to say yes to God without overthinking your next step. Not the whole life plan or the 10-year strategy, not the entire map, preferably laminated, colour-coded and filed somewhere sensible. Just the next faithful step, because very often that's all God gives us. Very often that is enough. Now, I think sometimes we imagine obedience should feel clearer than it does. We hear phrases like, just trust God, or just step out in faith. And of course, there is truth in that. But when you're the person carrying the consequences of a decision, those phrases can feel less simple. When you're a wife, a mother, a carer, a daughter, a friend, a worker, or church member, or several of those things all at once, saying yes to God doesn't happen in a neat little spiritual bubble. It lands inside an actual life, your life. It affects your energy, your calendar, your family, your emotions and finances, your home, your relationships, and your sense of safety. So if you've ever felt God nudging you towards something and then found yourself thinking about it for a very long time, 3 weeks, 6 months, or possibly a modest decade, I don't think that automatically means you're being faithless. Sometimes it means you have lived long enough to understand that obedience has weight. You know, choices matter. You understand that time is not endless. You've learned, often through hard experience, that capacity is real and consequences don't politely disappear because something sounded spiritual at the time. You also know that saying yes to one thing usually means saying no to something else. And that can be difficult when you're used to holding so many people and so many needs in mind. So you hesitate, you pray about it, think about it, talk yourself out of it, come back to it and wonder whether God is still asking. You decide that you need more clarity and then wait for a sign. Ideally something unmistakable, a verse, a confirmation or an email and perhaps a small heavenly memo saying, yes, this one, proceed. But very often God doesn't work like that. He gives us enough light to walk by, not always enough information to remove the need for trust. And that's uncomfortable, particularly for women who've spent years managing details, anticipating needs, preventing problems and trying to keep everyone else reasonably safe and functioning. Trust can feel exposed when you're used to managing. Now, there is such a thing as wise waiting. There really is. Some seasons are not for rushing. There are times when God asks us to pause, pray, let something mature, gather wisdom, wait for timing, or refuse to move simply because pressure is loud. Waiting can be obedience. But there is another kind of waiting that's less peaceful than it looks. It's the kind that sounds sensible, but underneath it's full of fear. We may call it discernment, but deep down we're terrified of getting it wrong. We may describe it as wisdom, but what we actually want is a level of control God has not promised. We may tell ourselves we are waiting on the Lord, when perhaps He's already shown us enough to take the next step. Overthinking can feel responsible. It can even feel humble. It gives us something to do while avoiding the vulnerability of trust, because trust is not the same as certainty. Trust does not mean we know exactly how everything will unfold. It means we believe God will be with us as it does, and that distinction matters deeply. Many of us are not waiting for God to speak. We're waiting for obedience to feel safe enough that we no longer need faith. And while that's very understandable, especially if life has taught us to be cautious, it's not usually the way God forms courage in us. He doesn't tend to give us a complete picture and then ask us to admire it. He invites us to walk with him, one step, then another, then another. And often the next step only becomes clear once we've taken the one already in front of us. There is a beautiful verse in Isaiah 30, verse 21. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." I love the simplicity of that. The instruction is directional, not exhaustive. It doesn't say, this is the entire life plan. Please understand every implication before proceeding. It doesn't say, this is the way. Wait until you feel confident, competent, emotionally stable, well-rested, and certain of everybody's response. It says, this is the way. Walk in it. There is movement in that. There's relationship in that. There is a quiet assumption that God's presence is enough for the road he's asking us to take. And if we're honest, many of us would prefer more detail. We would quite like to know where this is going, how long it's going to take, what it'll cost, whether other people will understand, whether we'll be okay, if there's a backup plan, and if refreshments are provided. But God often forms courage by giving us enough light for obedience, not so much light that we no longer need him. That's not unkind, it's deeply loving, because God is not merely trying to get us somewhere, he's teaching us to walk with him. Courage in the Christian life is not the absence of fear. It's not a personality type. It's not volume. It's not being naturally adventurous or pretending we're fine while quietly unraveling near the reduced section in Tesco's. Courage is trust in motion. It's what happens when God's voice is allowed to carry more authority than fear. Fear may still be present. Sometimes it follows along like an unwanted passenger, making gloomy comments from the back seat, but it doesn't get to drive. This matters for Christian women because many of us have become highly skilled at protecting, managing, planning, and absorbing the emotional weight of the household. We notice things, we anticipate things, we sense shifts in people's moods. We think through consequences before anyone else has even noticed there may be a decision to make. Now, those can be beautiful gifts, but they can become exhausting burdens. When God invites us into obedience, we may struggle because we can't manage him. We can't control the outcome of what he asks. We can't guarantee how others will respond. We cannot know in advance whether it will be easy, understood, successful, or affirmed, but we can know him. And sometimes that has to become enough. Saying yes to God is not agreeing to control the future. It's agreeing to walk with him into it. That's a much lighter burden than the one many of us keep trying to carry. So what does this look like in ordinary life? Well, for most of us, courageous obedience will not begin with something dramatic. It may begin with a conversation we've been avoiding in marriage because keeping the peace has started to cost us our honesty. It may look like creating a small rhythm of prayer in the home, not because we suddenly feel deeply spiritual, but because we know the atmosphere of our home needs to be shaped by something stronger than hurry and reaction. Sometimes the next step is asking for help. Sometimes it's stepping back from a responsibility we took on from guilt rather than calling. For one woman, obedience may mean serving quietly. For another, it may mean finally admitting that she's been serving beyond grace and actually needs to stop. There are seasons where saying yes to God looks like beginning something new. There are others where it looks like ending something because it's become unhealthy now. It may involve opening the Bible again after a dry season, putting the phone down when it keeps stealing peace, apologising without defending ourselves, saying no without writing a 3-page essay, or choosing to begin again when the morning has already gone wrong before 10. The point is not every action has to be large. In fact, most faithful steps are almost embarrassingly ordinary. Send the message, make the appointment, start the journal, have the conversation. Pray before reacting, tell the truth, put down what God has not asked you to carry, and pick up what He's placed in your hands. That is where courage is often formed, not in the imagined heroic moment, but in the ordinary place where God asks for a faithful yes. So here is the question I want to gently leave you with today. Are you calling something waiting when actually it might be fear? Not to shame you or force you or rush you into something God has not asked of you, but simply notice fear loses some of its authority when it's brought into the light. You may want to ask God whether He's already shown you the next step. Perhaps the question's no longer what should I do, but will I trust you enough to do what I already know? There may be an area where you've been asking for wisdom, but what you're really seeking is certainty. There may be a place where you're waiting for confidence when God is offering peace. And perhaps courage is not going to arrive as a feeling before obedience, but as strength while you walk. Those are not easy things to face, but they are clarifying, and clarity is often much quieter than we expect. Here are a few questions you might want to sit with this week or talk through with someone that you trust. What is one small step I keep circling but not taking? What am I afraid might happen if I say yes? Have I been waiting for confidence when God may be asking for trust? And where do I need to stop demanding the whole map before I take the next faithful step? Finally, what would obedience look like if it was quiet, ordinary, and small? If today's episode has resonated with you, especially if you feel God has been inviting you into greater steadiness, discernment, and courage, my book, Armed and Anchored, was written for this kind of journey. It's a 7-week guide for Christian women who want to become more rooted in God's truth, more aware of what's shaping them, and more able to stand steadily in a culture that constantly pulls our attention, emotions, and peace. You can find Armed and Anchored through my website at johewlettauthor.com. And if this episode has helped you, perhaps share it with another woman who may be standing at the edge of a quiet decision and needing the reminder that courage does not always feel bold. Sometimes it simply looks like taking the next faithful step. Let me pray for you. Father, for the woman who feels caught between knowing and moving, I ask that you would meet her with gentle courage. Help her recognize your voice without turning obedience into panic. Show her the difference between wise waiting and fear-filled delay. Quiet the fear that says she must completely be ready before she can be faithful. Teach her to trust that you, Lord, are present in the step, not only in the outcome, and help her walk with you steadily, humbly, and courageously. Amen. Until next time, stay rooted, walk steadily, and keep building a life that cannot be easily shaken.